You made your bed, Laura. Now, lie in it. Margaret Bennett's words still burned in Laura's mind as she trudged through the Colorado blizzard. Her infant daughter pressed against her chest, 3 small children clinging to her coat. 3 weeks ago, those words had been delivered across a mahogany dining table, in a house warm enough to make the winter outside seem like another world entirely. Daniel chose you against our wishes. We warned him that a woman with nothing would drag him down. And look what happened. Laura had swallowed every ounce of pride that day. She had begged. On her knees, she had begged a woman who looked through the window at her own grandchildren and saw only inconvenience. 4 mouths to feed? We're not running a charity, dear. If you wasted Daniel's life insurance, that's your failing, not ours. There had been no life insurance. The logging company had labeled Daniel's death as worker negligence rather than workplace accident. No compensation, no settlement, just a widow with 4 children and a mountain of medical bills from Emma's birth, 3 weeks after her father vanished beneath snow and timber. Take your children and leave. This family owes you nothing. The door had closed. The locks had clicked. And Margaret Bennett had returned to her warm dinner while her grandchildren shivered in a car that would be repossessed 14 days later. Now Laura walked through white death, each step heavier than the last, and wondered if Margaret would feel vindicated when they found the bodies. 4 miles behind them, her car sat dead on the roadside, engine frozen, hope extinguished. The shelter in Fairview was supposed to be 15 miles ahead. She had calculated wrong. The storm had come faster, and now her children were going to die because their mother had made another terrible decision. Tommy, 8 years old and trying so hard to be brave, gripped her coat with fingers that had stopped feeling an hour ago. Lily and Grace, 5 and 4, stumbled between steps, their small bodies burning the last reserves of warmth. And Emma, 8 weeks old, had stopped crying. Babies should cry. The silence terrified Laura more than the wind. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments and let us know if you've ever walked through a storm that felt impossible to survive. Ethan Walker had not spoken to another human being in 19 days. He counted, not intentionally, but the way a man counts the days since something ended, or someone left, or the world stopped making sense. 19 days since his last supply run into town. 19 days of silence, broken only by wind, by rangers' occasional bark, by the ghosts that lived in the spaces between heartbeats. The red pickup pushed through the mountain road, headlights carving tunnels through the white chaos. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel. They were always steady. 4 years since his last mission, and his body still remembered how to function when everything else fell apart. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, ears alert, nose twitching at the glass. The German Shepherd was 10 years old now, gray spreading through his muzzle like frost. But his instincts remained sharp. Those instincts had saved Ethan's life more times than either of them could count. The dog's head snapped left. Ethan glanced over. Ranger was rigid, staring through the window into the white nothing, every muscle tense with focus. "What is it, boy?" A low whine, then a bark, urgent, demanding. Ethan slowed the truck, scanning the roadside through the blizzard. Nothing, just snow and darkness and the howling complaint of wind that wanted everything dead. Ranger barked again, pawing at the door. Ethan trusted that dog more than he trusted himself. He pulled to the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical assault. He was used to it. 4 winters in this cabin had taught him to respect the mountain's teeth. He moved around the front of the truck, following the direction of Ranger's attention, squinting through the snow. And then he saw them. A woman. Walking, no, staggering, clutching something against her chest. Behind her, 3 small shapes moved like ghosts, barely visible through the white curtain. For one frozen moment, Ethan did not move. Could not move. Because he knew what he was seeing. He knew what it meant. And every instinct he had cultivated over 4 years of isolation screamed at him to get back in the truck and drive away. He was done saving people. Done being responsible for lives that could slip through his fingers like sand. Done carrying the weight of decisions that ended in body bags and folded flags. Ranger bounded past him, breaking through the snow toward the family with purpose Ethan couldn't deny. The dog reached them before Ethan could stop him, circling the children, pressing against their legs, as if to hold them upright through sheer will. The woman looked up. Even through the storm, Ethan could see her face, young but aged by something worse than weather, desperate but not broken. Not yet. Her lips moved. The wind stole her words. Ethan forced his legs to carry him forward, closing the distance until he stood 5 feet away. Close enough to be heard, far enough to give her space. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rough, scraped raw by weeks of silence. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Or maybe she was just shivering. Hard to tell. "Your children, are they injured?" Another shake. "Then we need to move." Ethan looked at the infant in her arms. Too still. Too quiet. "This storm's got another 12 hours at least. You stay out here. None of you make it to morning." The woman's arms tightened around her baby. Her eyes held fear, but not of the cold. She was afraid of him. A stranger on an empty road. A man with a dog and a truck and no one around to witness whatever might happen next. Ethan understood. He was afraid of himself, too, most days. "My name's Ethan Walker." He pointed back toward the glow of headlights. "I've got a cabin 4 miles from here. Warm, stocked, safe." Safe. The word felt like a lie in his mouth. He had not kept anyone safe in 4 years. The woman's gaze dropped to Ranger, who had positioned himself beside the oldest boy, letting small frozen fingers grip his fur. The dog looked back at her with patient brown eyes, tail moving in a slow wag despite the cold. "Ranger likes kids," Ethan said. "He's never wrong about people." Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not trust, not exactly, but perhaps the first crack in a wall she had built to survive. "Come with me," Ethan said. Then, softer, "If you stay out here, none of you will make it." She looked at her children, at the baby who had stopped crying, at the boy who was trying so hard not to collapse, at the 2 girls whose shivering had become violent tremors. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Ethan moved before the word fully left her mouth. He lifted the 2 younger girls, one in each arm, their bodies light and cold against his chest. They were too exhausted to resist, too frozen to care about stranger danger. "The truck's warm," he told the boy. "Stay close to Ranger. He'll keep you steady." The dog pressed against the boy's side like a living guardrail, guiding him through the snow. Ethan carried the girls to the truck, secured them in the back seat, cranked the heater to maximum. The woman followed with her infant, moving like someone underwater, every step requiring conscious effort. Within 90 seconds, they were all inside. The doors closed against the storm. Heat blasted from the vents, and Ethan sat behind the wheel, hands gripping hard enough to turn his knuckles white, wondering what he had just done. He had sworn never to be responsible for another person again. He had just taken responsibility for 5. If you're watching alone tonight, give this video a like so we know you're here. Sometimes the storms we walk through aren't made of snow. The truck crawled through the blizzard, headlights barely penetrating the white wall ahead. Ethan drove from memory, from instinct, from the 4 years of solitary existence that had carved this road into his bones. No one spoke. The heater roared. The children huddled together in the back seat, Ranger somehow having squeezed in beside them despite his size. The only sounds were chattering teeth and the wind's relentless assault. Then the woman spoke. "She won't eat." Ethan glanced at the infant in her arms. The baby was awake now, eyes open, but something was wrong. The movements were sluggish. The skin held a bluish tint that made Ethan's stomach clench. "She stopped crying an hour ago," the woman continued, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what to do." Ethan pulled to the side of the road. There was no shoulder here, but he positioned the truck against a snowbank and killed the engine, turning to face her fully. "May I see her?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. He reached across, and she surrendered the infant with trembling hands. Emma. The name was stitched into the blanket. 8 weeks old, maybe less, and far too cold. Ethan unwrapped the wet blankets with practiced efficiency, checking pulse at the tiny neck, listening to the shallow breathing, feeling the temperature of extremities against his palm. "Hypothermia," he said flatly. "Core temperature's dropping. We need skin-to-skin contact, body heat, now." He shed his jacket, then his flannel shirt, the cold hitting his skin like needles. Before the woman could process what he was doing, he had pressed Emma against his bare chest, wrapping his jacket around them both to trap the warmth. "Your clothes are wet," he explained, not looking at her, all attention on the infant. "Mine are dry. Direct body heat is the fastest method." The woman stared at him, at this stranger holding her newborn daughter against his heart, with a tenderness that seemed impossible in hands so large. "The heater," Ethan said. "Turn it up, all the way. Adjust the vents toward us." She obeyed, her own hands shaking on the controls. "How do you know how to do this?" she asked. "Combat medic training, 3 deployments." He paused. "Some things you don't forget." For 12 minutes they sat in silence. Ethan held Emma against his chest, feeling the tiny heart flutter beneath paper-thin skin, willing warmth from his body into hers. The woman watched with an expression he couldn't read. The children in the back had fallen asleep against Ranger's fur. Exhaustion finally winning. Then Emma stirred. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and she cried. Weak, barely more than a whimper. But it was the sound of life returning, and the woman let out a sob that held 8 months of accumulated grief. "She's coming back," Ethan said, "but we need to reach the cabin. She needs proper warming. All of you do." He handed Emma back, pulled his shirt on, started the engine. The truck continued its slow crawl through the storm. But something had shifted in the silence between them. Some invisible barrier had cracked. And Ethan Walker, who had spent 4 years building walls against the world, felt the first stone begin to loosen. The cabin emerged from the darkness like something carved from the mountain itself. Log walls, stone chimney, snow piled on the roof, but cleared from the porch by hands that understood survival. Ethan parked close to the door and moved with military efficiency. He had the two girls in his arms before the woman had unbuckled her seatbelt, carrying them inside while Ranger bounded ahead to check the perimeter. The boy followed close behind, hand still reaching for the dog whenever it came near. The fire started fast. Ethan had laid the kindling that morning, as he did every morning, prepared for the cold that was always coming. Flames caught the dry wood and spread, filling the small space with warmth and dancing light. "Blankets in the chest by the window," he said without looking up. "Get the wet clothes off the children. Everything wet. There should be sweaters in the bedroom closet. Too big, but they'll work." The woman moved with purpose now, stripping soaked layers from her children, wrapping them in wool, pulling oversized flannel over shivering bodies. The cabin was simple but complete. Main room with fireplace and kitchen. Single bedroom. Bathroom with running water. Everything a man needed to live alone. And Ethan Walker lived very alone. The walls held no photographs except one. A faded frame on a high shelf, turned slightly away from the room, showing 6 men in desert camouflage, arms around shoulders, smiles that seemed to belong to a different lifetime. Ethan did not look at the photograph, had not looked at it in months. Within an hour, the cabin had transformed. The children huddled on a worn rug by the fire, color returning to their faces. Ranger had positioned himself between them, a warm barrier against nightmares and cold floors. The boy, Tommy, had his hand buried in the dog's fur like an anchor. The woman sat in a wooden chair near the window, Emma nursing again, doing all the things babies were supposed to do. The relief in her posture was visible, a loosening of muscles she had held clenched for days. Ethan moved around the kitchen, heating canned soup, finding crackers and peanut butter. He worked in silence, asking nothing, explaining nothing. His name was Daniel. The words came quiet, aimed at the fire rather than at him. Ethan paused at the stove, then continued stirring. "My husband." The woman's voice held the flatness of a story told too many times to carry emotion anymore. "He died 8 months ago. Months. Avalanche. He worked for a logging company up in the mountains. They sent his crew out in conditions they never should have faced. Storm came faster than predicted." Silence. The soup bubbled. Wind threw itself against the windows. "They said it was his fault. Said he should have known better." She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Denied the insurance claim. Denied everything. I tried to sue. Couldn't afford a lawyer. Legal aid said I didn't have a case." Ethan poured soup into mismatched bowls. "I was 8 months pregnant when he died," she continued. "Emma was born 3 weeks later, named her after his mother, hoping it would mean something." "Did it?" The question seemed to surprise her. "No. His mother told me I was no longer family, that Daniel's death was my fault somehow." Her jaw tightened. She said if he hadn't married beneath himself, he would have had a better job, a safer job, a better life. Ethan brought soup to the children, showing Tommy how to eat slowly so his stomach wouldn't rebel. Then he carried a bowl to the woman and set it on the small table beside her. "What's your name?" he asked. Laura Bennett." "Laura." He nodded once, accepting the information. "Why were you out there? In the mountains? In winter? With 4 children?" "Our car died 30 miles back." She sipped the soup, closed her eyes at the warmth. "Couldn't afford repairs. Couldn't afford anything. We were heading to a shelter in Fairview. The storm came faster than I expected." She met his gaze. "I made a mistake. I thought we could walk to the next town before the worst hit. I was wrong. You were trying to survive. I was trying not to burden anyone." The words came sharper than she intended. "Everyone I've asked for help in the past 8 months has either said no or made me regret asking. So I stopped asking. Decided I could handle it alone." Ethan leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. "How's that working out?" The question should have felt cruel. Instead, it felt honest. "Not great," Laura admitted. Obviously. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not a smile, but something adjacent. "Storm's not stopping for 3 days," he said. "Maybe 5. You're stuck here until then. After that, we'll figure out the car, the shelter, whatever comes next." "Why?" "Why what?" "Why help us?" Laura's voice held genuine confusion. "You live out here alone for a reason. We're an intrusion, a complication. Why not just drive us to the nearest town and be done with it?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the photograph on the shelf, then away. "Because leaving people to die in the cold isn't something I do," he said finally. "It's not something I'll ever do." The words carried weight. History. Pain that Laura recognized because she carried her own version. She didn't push, didn't ask, just nodded and returned to her soup while Emma slept warm against her chest and the fire crackled against the storm outside. The days blurred into each other, marked only by meals and sleep cycles and the endless white beyond the windows. The storm raged for 6 days, burying the world, trapping them together in a space that forced proximity, whether they wanted it or not. Ethan found himself adjusting, making small accommodations he hadn't planned, cutting sandwiches into shapes that made the girls giggle, finding old toys in a closet he hadn't opened in years, teaching Tommy how to stack kindling for a proper fire, how to judge when logs needed turning, how to respect flames without fearing them. "Like this?" Tommy held the kindling arrangement up for inspection. "Perfect." Ethan nodded approval. "You've got steady hands. That matters." The boy's face lit up in a way that made Ethan's chest tight. He noticed Laura watching these moments, cataloging them, trying to reconcile the man who lived alone in the mountains with the man who remembered how to make children smile. On the 4th night, Laura woke to darkness and wind. The sound had worked its way into her dreams, transforming into something else. The roar of snow cascading down a mountainside, the thunder of a world collapsing, the last sound Daniel ever heard. She sat rigid in the darkness, heart hammering, sweat cooling on her skin despite the cold. The children slept around her, undisturbed. But she could not shake the feeling that death was pressing against the windows, waiting for its chance. A warm weight settled against her side. Ranger. The dog had left his spot by the children and come to her, pressing his body against her legs, resting his heavy head on her knee. His brown eyes caught the faint glow of dying embers, watching her with something that looked like understanding. Laura buried her fingers in his fur and focused on breathing. In the main room, she could see Ethan's silhouette by the window. He stood motionless, staring at the storm, his own demons keeping him company in the dark. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Two people haunted by different ghosts, sharing space in the small hours when the living felt outnumbered. On the 5th morning, Tommy found the photograph. He was exploring the cabin, restless from days of confinement, when he discovered the album in a closet. Before Laura could stop him, he had carried it to the fire and opened it to pages filled with military images, desert landscapes, equipment, weapons, and at the center of one photograph, a younger Ethan Walker with his arm around another man's shoulders, both of them grinning, both of them whole. "Is that you?" Tommy asked. Ethan had gone still by the stove. "Yes." "Who's the other man?" His name was Marcus. Was. Past tense. Laura watched understanding dawn on her son's face. "Did he die?" "Tommy." Laura's voice carried warning, but Ethan turned from the stove. His face was carefully controlled, but something moved beneath the surface. "Yes," he told Tommy. "He died. They all did. Everyone in that picture, except M." The cabin fell silent. Tommy looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he closed the album and stood, walking to where Ethan stood. The boy barely reached the man's chest, but his gaze was steady. "I'm sorry," Tommy said simply. "That's really sad." Ethan looked down at the boy. Something cracked in his expression. Just for a second. Just enough. "Yeah," he said roughly. "It is." That night, while the children slept, Laura found Ethan on the porch. He stood in the cold without a jacket, letting the wind cut through him, staring at mountains hidden by darkness and snow. "You'll freeze," she said from the doorway. "I've been colder." She stepped onto the porch, pulling her borrowed coat tight. "You didn't have to tell him about your team," he asked. Ethan's breath fogged in the air. "Kids deserve honest answers. Most adults don't give them. Most adults have forgotten what it's like to need truth more than comfort." They stood in silence, two strangers sharing cold and darkness, both carrying weights they couldn't set down. "You carry ghosts," Laura said softly. "I can see them." Ethan turned to look at her. His eyes held depths she couldn't begin to measure. "So do you," he said. Recognition, one survivor acknowledging another. Laura felt something shift in her chest. "What happened?" she asked. "To your team?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Flatter. Emptier. 4 years ago. Final mission. I was team leader." He paused. "We walked into an ambush. I made a call, ordered a retreat through what I thought was the safe route." Another pause. "It wasn't." Laura waited. "Explosion took everyone except me and Ranger. I was supposed to bring them home." His jaw tightened. "I didn't. It wasn't your fault. I was the one who made the call. I was the one who chose that path." He turned back to the darkness. "Fault or not, they're still dead. And I'm still here. And I've spent 4 years trying to figure out why." Laura stepped closer. Close enough to feel the cold radiating from his body. "Maybe you're still here because someone still needs you." Ethan didn't respond. But he didn't move away either. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to find out what happens when Tommy makes a choice that will test everything this fragile family is building. The storm broke on day 7. Laura woke to silence, to blue sky visible through frost-covered windows, to the strange feeling of peace that comes after chaos passes. The children were still asleep, tangled together with Ranger in the middle, like the eye of their own small storm. She found Ethan on the porch, watching the sun rise over mountains finally visible after a week of white blindness. "Beautiful," she said. He nodded. "Always is. After." The word held weight. After the storm. After the loss. After everything falls apart, and the world decides to keep turning anyway. "What happens now?" Laura asked. Roads should be passable in a day or two. Ethan didn't look at her. We can figure out your car. Get you to that shelter. The shelter? Laura had almost forgotten. The original destination, the temporary solution that now felt like a step backward from something she couldn't name. Right, she said. The shelter. Neither of them moved. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere inside the cabin, children began to stir, bringing noise and need and the complicated business of living back into a space that had held only silence for so long. The 10th night shattered everything. Tommy had been quiet all day, quieter than usual, which was already too quiet for an 8-year-old. Laura noticed, but attributed it to cabin fever, to the restlessness that came from being trapped indoors for so long. She should have paid closer attention. At 2 in the morning, Ranger's bark split the silence. Ethan was on his feet before Laura fully woke, moving toward the main room with the instincts of a man who had learned to react first and think second. Laura followed, her heart already racing, and found the front door standing open. Cold poured in, snow swirled across the threshold, and Tommy was gone. "Stay with the children," Ethan commanded, grabbing his jacket. "Keep them inside. Do not follow me." He disappeared into the darkness before Laura could respond. Ranger bounded after him, nose to the ground, tracking the scent of a boy who had decided to run from everything that hurt. Laura stood in the doorway, freezing wind tearing at her clothes, watching the flashlight beam grow smaller until it vanished into the white nothing. She gathered Grace and Lily, who had woken crying, and held them against her chest, while her mind spiraled through every terrible possibility. 23 minutes later, Ethan returned. He carried Tommy in his arms, the boy's face pale, his lips tinged with blue, his body shaking with cold that had sunk past skin into bone. Ranger pressed close behind, whining with anxiety. Ethan set Tommy by the fire, stripped off the wet outer layers, wrapped him in blankets. His movements were efficient, controlled, professional. Then he turned to the boy, and something broke. "What were you thinking?" The words came out loud, sharp, cutting through the cabin like gunfire. "You could have died out there. Do you understand that? 15 more minutes, and I would have found a body instead of a boy." Tommy flinched as if struck. Tears streamed down his frozen cheeks. "I wanted to go home," he whispered. "I wanted to find Dad. Your father is dead." Ethan's voice held no softness. "He's not coming back. Running into a blizzard won't change that. It will only make your mother bury another person she loves." The words landed like physical blows. Tommy curled into himself, sobbing, and Laura felt something inside her snap. "Stop!" She stepped between Ethan and her son, her body a shield, her voice trembling with fury. "Don't you ever speak to my child that way. He nearly killed himself because he wasn't thinking. He's 8 years old. He lost his father. He's scared and confused and grieving, and you're standing there treating him like a soldier who failed inspection." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm treating him like someone who needs to understand consequences. We don't need another man who tells us what to do." The words erupted from somewhere deep, from months of being lectured by lawyers and caseworkers and in-laws, who all knew better than the widow, trying to keep her children alive. "We don't need someone barking orders and making my son feel worse than he already does. If that's what you're offering, we'll take our chances with the storm." Silence crashed down between them. Ethan stood motionless, something shifting behind his eyes. Not anger. Something worse. Recognition. Like her words had found a wound he had been protecting for years. Without a word, he turned and walked out onto the porch, letting the door close behind him. Laura gathered Tommy in her arms, rocking him, whispering the words mothers whisper when there is nothing else to offer. The girls eventually fell back asleep. Ranger positioned himself by the fire, watching the door, waiting for his master to return. Ethan did not come back inside until dawn. If you've ever said something in anger that you wished you could take back, type regret in the comments. Sometimes our deepest wounds make us wound others. The morning brought silence of a different kind. Ethan moved through the cabin like a ghost, preparing breakfast without speaking, avoiding eye contact, keeping maximum distance in minimum space. Laura watched him and felt the weight of her words pressing against her chest. She had been right to protect Tommy, but she had also been cruel. She had taken a man's deepest pain and used it as a weapon. It was Tommy who broke the impasse. While Laura nursed Emma in the bedroom, the boy slipped away from his sisters and approached Ethan, who stood by the window staring at nothing. "I'm sorry, I ran away." Ethan didn't turn. "You scared your mother." "I know." Tommy's voice was small, but steady. "I scared myself, too. But I wasn't trying to find Dad. Not really." He paused. "I was trying to stop being scared. I thought if I was brave like he was, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much." Now Ethan turned. His face held exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like recognition. "Your father was brave," Ethan said slowly. "But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It doesn't mean doing everything alone." He crouched down, bringing himself to Tommy's level. "The bravest men I ever knew were the ones who admitted when they needed help, who let their team carry part of the weight. Did you have a team?" "I did. Once." "What happened to them?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I lost them, because I tried to carry too much myself. Made a decision without asking for input. Thought I knew better than everyone else." His voice roughened. "I was wrong, and they paid for my mistake." Tommy absorbed this with the gravity only children possess when they sense truth being offered. "Is that why you live alone? Because you're scared of making more mistakes?" The question hit Ethan like a bullet he never saw coming. He stared at the boy, at the honest eyes that demanded honest answers, and felt something crack in the wall he had spent 4 years building. "Yeah," he admitted. "That's exactly why." Tommy nodded slowly. Then he reached out and took Ethan's hand. "Maybe we could be scared together," he said. "That's what my dad used to tell me. Being scared alone is hard. Being scared together is easier." Ethan looked at the small hand in his, at the boy who had lost his father and nearly lost his life, and still found courage to offer comfort to a broken stranger. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we could." Laura stood in the bedroom doorway watching. She had heard everything, and for the first time, she saw Ethan Walker not as a rescuer or a soldier or a man hiding from the world, but as someone just as lost as she was, trying to find his way back to something worth living for. That afternoon, while the children napped, she found him splitting wood behind the cabin. "I'm sorry." The words came out before she could overthink them. "What I said last night was wrong. You weren't trying to hurt Tommy. You were scared for him." Ethan set down the axe. "You weren't wrong. I was treating him like a subordinate instead of a child. Old habits." He met her eyes. "I haven't been around kids in ever. I don't know how to do this. Neither did I until I had 4 of them." Laura offered a small smile. "We figure it out as we go. Make mistakes, Try again. That simple? That terrifying? She stepped closer. But worth it, if you let it be. Something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but the beginning of something. Partnership, trust, the fragile foundation of a bridge being built across two chasms of grief. The world outside their cabin had other plans. 3 days later, when the roads finally cleared, a black sedan appeared on the mountain path. 2 officials emerged, their faces carrying the practiced neutrality of bureaucrats delivering bad news. Child Protective Services had come to investigate. Someone had reported concerns about 4 children living with a homeless mother in a stranger's cabin. The questions came rapid fire, each one designed to expose inadequacy. Stable housing? No. Employment? No. Legal relationship to the man providing shelter? None. Mrs. Bennett, the woman said, her clipboard filled with damning checkboxes. We have serious concerns about your ability to provide adequate care for your children. I'm doing everything I can. Intent isn't the same as capability. We're recommending temporary placement while you establish stable circumstances. Temporary placement. The words meant foster care, separation. Her children scattered to different homes because no one wanted 4 at once. Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. That night, after the officials left with promises to return in 48 hours, Laura made her decision. She would sign the papers. Let them take her children. Give them a chance at something better than a mother who couldn't provide basic stability. It was the hardest decision she had ever considered. But she had run out of fight, run out of hope, run out of everything except the desperate belief that her children deserved more than she could offer. She was packing their few belongings, preparing to slip away before dawn, when Ranger appeared in the doorway of the children's room. The old dog sat down directly in her path. Not growling, not barking, just present, immovable. Move, Laura whispered. Please, I have to do this. Ranger didn't move. She tried to step around him, but the dog shifted, blocking her again. Patient, persistent, refusing to let her pass. You don't understand. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm not leaving them. I'm giving them a chance. By abandoning them? Ethan's voice came from the shadows. He stepped into the dim light, his face unreadable. I'm not abandoning them. I'm saving them from Mer. That's what you're telling yourself. But what happens when they wake up and you're gone? When Grace has nightmares and you're not there? When Lily needs someone to hold her and finds an empty bed? They'll have stability, structure, things I can't give them. They'll have strangers, separation, a system that sees them as case numbers instead of children. Ethan moved closer. I know, because I've seen it. Kids who came through foster care into the military because they had nowhere else to go. Most of them spent their whole lives feeling like they weren't worth keeping. Laura's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, and the sobs she had been holding for months finally broke free. Ranger moved to her side, pressing his warm body against her, anchoring her to the present. Sounds came from the bedroom, small feet on wooden floors. The children appeared in the doorway, woken by voices they shouldn't have heard. Mommy? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Are you leaving? Please, don't go. Lily grabbed Laura's arm, her small fingers desperate. Please, Mommy, please. Tommy stood apart, his face older than any 8-year-old's should be. You promised, he said quietly. You promised you'd never leave us. Laura pulled her children close, all of them, holding them as if they might dissolve if she let go. I'm not leaving, she managed through tears. I'm here. I'm staying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching a family cling to each other against the current, trying to tear them apart. And something settled in his chest. A decision made not with his head, but with something deeper. Laura. His voice was rough. Look at me. She raised her eyes, her face streaked with tears, her children pressed against her body. I don't know how to be a family, Ethan said slowly, each word deliberate, as if speaking them made them real. I don't know if I'll be any good at this, but I know how to stay. I know how to fight. And I am not letting them take your children. Wait. The question came broken. Why do you care what happens to us? Because I spent 4 years running from everyone, convincing myself that staying away kept people safe. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level. And then you walked out of a blizzard, and your son started asking me questions no one else dared to ask, and that dog stopped sleeping by my bed and started sleeping by theirs. He glanced at Ranger, who watched with knowing eyes. For the first time in 4 years, this cabin feels like something other than a place to hide. He met Laura's gaze. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of running. And I'm not letting you face this alone. Drop a comment if you believe people can change. Sometimes it takes a storm to show us who we really are. Ethan worked through the night. His phone, unused for months except for supply orders, burned hot against his ear as he made call after call. Former teammates who had transitioned to civilian life. A JAG officer who owed him a favor. A buddy who had become a family law attorney in Denver. By morning, he had assembled something that looked like a battle plan. When CPS returned 2 days later, they were met not by a desperate homeless mother and a solitary stranger, but by a legal representative, documentation of guardianship applications, and a veteran prepared to navigate their system with the same precision he had once navigated combat zones. Before you proceed, Ethan said calmly, I'd like to introduce our legal counsel. We've also filed for emergency co-guardianship, which requires a hearing before any placement decisions can be finalized. The officials exchanged glances. They were not accustomed to resistance this organized. The hearing took place 1 week later in a Fairview courtroom. Laura wore borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. Ethan wore a suit that felt like armor from a life he had left behind. But it was Laura who stood before the judge. Laura who found her voice. I have made mistakes, she said, her hands steady despite her racing heart. I trusted people who let me down. I made decisions from desperation that I would make differently now. But I have never stopped fighting for my children. Not when my husband died. Not when his family abandoned us. Not when the world seemed determined to take everything I had left. She presented documentation of job applications, apartment inquiries, every effort she had made since arriving at Ethan's cabin. I am not the same woman who walked into that blizzard, she continued. I have found support. I have found hope. And I have found someone willing to stand beside me while I rebuild what was broken. The judge reviewed the paperwork, looked at Ethan, looked at the children sitting quietly in the gallery, Tommy holding Grace's hand. Mr. Walker, you understand the responsibilities you're accepting? Ethan stood. Yes, Your Honor. And you're prepared to fulfill them? Completely. The judge was silent for a long moment. The court finds that removing these children from their mother's care would cause more harm than benefit. Temporary co-guardianship is granted to Mr. Ethan Walker, with Mrs. Bennett retaining full parental rights. Case to be reviewed in 6 months. Outside the courthouse, Tommy tugged at Ethan's hand. Does this mean you're staying, for real? Ethan looked down at the boy, then at Laura. then at the three girls who had started calling him by name instead of the man. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "I'm staying." 6 months became a year. The cabin grew, room by room, built by hands that were learning to create instead of destroy. Tommy learned to measure and cut. Grace learned that nightmares couldn't survive morning sunlight. Lily learned to trust that the people she loved would still be there when she woke. Laura found work at a veterinary clinic in town, discovered she had a gift for calming frightened animals, began building a life that belonged to her. And one evening each week, she volunteered at the local shelter, sitting with mothers who had walked through their own blizzards. "You don't have to do this alone," she told them, the same words she had needed to hear. Accepting help isn't weakness. It's survival. Ranger grew slower, grayer, but no less devoted. He still slept among the children, still positioned himself between them and any door, still watched over his expanded pack with patient brown eyes. On a winter morning, 18 months after the blizzard, Laura stood at the window watching snow fall gently on a world that no longer felt hostile. The red pickup sat in the driveway, the same truck that had stopped on a frozen road and changed everything. Tommy burst through the door, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Mom, Ethan said we can get a Christmas tree this weekend, a real one. Can we? Can we please?" Laura smiled, a real smile, the kind she had forgotten how to make. "I think we can manage that." Ethan appeared behind Tommy, snow dusting his shoulders, looking at Laura with something that had grown slowly over months of shared meals and midnight conversations and the ordinary courage of choosing each other, day after day. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at her children, at the cabin that had become home, at the man who had stopped when he could have driven past. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." And in a cabin in the Colorado mountains, surrounded by 4 children and a dog who had known before anyone else, 2 people who had lost everything discovered that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was built in blizzards, in hard choices, in the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. Not through miracles, through the courage to remain.